here's what thriving looks like. You get to the point where you can refinance properties that have built up equity now, have appreciated some. You've rehabbed them and added value, so they're worth more now. And all of a sudden, you get tax-free money.
Welcome to the Good Stewards Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to seasoned real estate investors who want to maximize the cash flow potential in their business. We are buy and hold investors with 1,000+ properties and markets across the U.S. who bring an insider's view into the nitty-gritty details of real estate investing. If you're looking to develop the mindset, teams, and systems that can dramatically build your real estate business and net worth, you're in the right place.
Welcome to this episode of the Good Stewards Podcast. I'm Ryan Dossie.
I'm Amanda Perkins.
I'm Bill Sirius.
And I'm Andrew Sirius.
Hello, welcome to our podcast today. This is an exciting topic we're going to be talking about, but before we do, please look us up at thegoodstewards.com. Download our ebook, give us some likes, tell your friends about us. We'd really appreciate getting the word out. We're going to talk about I think the truly best wealth building opportunity that people with modest means have in our society, and that is buy and hold real estate investment. There's precious few endeavors that one can get into unless they are a software genius or are a trust fund baby that they can become wealthy. This is one of them, and maybe the best one. I remember Andrew Carnegie said that 90% of the millionaires in the United States came to that kind of financial status through real estate investment. I've never checked his numbers out, but I got to believe that they're probably close to accurate. It kind of hit me just the other day. As a matter of fact, about 3 or 4 days ago, Amanda was driving down a street, and she said, "It's so funny. And it's kind of a main street in Eugene. It's River Road, actually." And she said, all the houses on this street are at an angle. They're not straight to the street. And I said, yeah, you're right about that. As a matter of fact, I owned a house on that street. It was, you can look it up if you want. It was 2996 River Road. And, as I thought about it, I talked to Amanda over the phone. We were just having a cell phone conversation about this street. And it was a property that I bought because it had a large lot to it, and I was able to subdivide 3 lots in the back and sell them off. But then it came to the fact of the house. I never liked the house because it was on a busy street. We actually rehabbed it really nicely. And I thought, I just don't want to own this house anymore. And that's a very poor reason to sell a house because I sold it 6 years ago for $155,000. I just looked it up. And
6 or 16 years ago?
No, 6 years ago.
6 years ago?
6 years ago, November 10th, 2014. I got it right in front of me here. Now, why I looked it up is because I wanted to see what it was worth now. And of course, I looked over, and you never can trust Zestimate, but it's listed at $290,000. So because I just didn't like the house, that's the kind of appreciation I left on the table. Now, of course, we don't know if if there's going to be future appreciation to that extent, but it does kind of remind me of the power, again, of buy and hold real estate, that you having put together an asset and having rehabbed it, putting it into your property management pool, you've got something that has real legs in terms of a upside to its value, and you can create wealth. If you do one like that, you do 6 like that, you do a dozen like that, boy, just think of the wealth potential that you have there.
I think the big thing you're talking about here is this is a game of patience to an extent. This is not, you've used the expression that I've now coined and repeated more times than I can count. This is get rich slow, but it's not that slow. I mean, we're not talking a 2% yield on a savings account kind of slow. But at the same time, it's also not, you're not a Bitcoin millionaire in 30 days.
I mean, you're not a Bitcoin bankrupt in 30 days either, though.
So, that's fair.
Give or take.
Well, I also have another term that I like, Ryan, and that's survive to thrive, because when you dive into buy and hold, and by the way, there's a lot of ways to get to buy and hold, and maybe I should start with that. One of them is to be someone who flips properties for profit, because that's going to get you into understanding all the mechanisms you need. So if you're new on the block with real estate investment, it's not at all bad to think about, putting together a bank account, a purse, something you can draw on for buy and hold. I know people who have done a flip, a second flip, and then the third one that they hold. And they go through that, kind of 3-step process. And then they get to a 2-step process where they flip one, they hold one, they flip one, they hold one. Whatever you need to do to point you in the direction of looking to build a rental portfolio is what's going to be in your best interest. There's not going to be a lot of people 10, 20, 30 years from now saying, oh gosh, I wish I didn't have these rental properties that I bought so long ago, which have paid the mortgage down, which have appreciated, which have paid me rent every month. There's not a lot of regret in that. There's a lot of regret potentially.
Assuming they pay for themselves.
Yeah, we're going to get
and
into that.
Assuming you're not buying for appreciation. I would also say on the flipping note, you can also wholesale to get there. That's what I did. I think I wholesaled 3 or 4 houses. And this was kind of before like the Burr model was really well known. So we got a lead on 2 properties owned by the same owner. This was in St. Louis, negotiated the purchase price. I believe we paid $45,000. The properties pulled in about $1,400 combined. Went to a local community banker, wanted 25% down, which I was homeschooled, so I'm not going to attempt to do that math. Something like 10 or 15 grand that we took out of profits from wholesale deals. And all of a sudden, I think really became investors. I think that's really buy and hold, I think is kind of when you get to wear that badge, because up until then, you really just kind of have a transactional business. If you're wholesaling or flipping, you're not, you're getting liquidity, which is something you need. Amanda and I talk about all the time.
My favorite topic.
My power company is not going to accept equity for my bill this month, right? They want cash. But when you really go from that dealer or transactional business model and mindset and transition over into the buy and hold piece, I think is really where you start turning the wheels of building some wealth.
Ryan, if you could just, how do you decide whether you're going to wholesale something, that is you're going to basically flip the contract, or if you're going to flip something, that is you're basically going to do a rehab and sell it to a homeowner? How do you make that decision?
So, I try to avoid flips at all costs. I would rather wholesale, which is I close on a home and then list it on the MLS for the widest exposure, over doing kind of a rehab. But I think it really just kind of comes down to the particular deal. And sometimes it's a matter of we attempt to wholesale it. We don't get maybe an offer that's enough of what we want. We go to wholesale it. Maybe that doesn't work. So, okay, we're going to pull this one back off the MLS and flip and turn it. I think I would hit on how I decide what I'm going to turn into cash versus keep for the portfolio. Is we try to own assets that are typical for the area is what I'm after. So if I'm in an area of 1970s, cinder block 3-1s, that are, 1,200 square feet, that's what I'm looking for. If I get a 500 square foot house, I'm going to let somebody else play that game. On the same side of things, we've had in A-class areas, one time I got a lead on a log cabin, and it was like, there's not comps for a log cabin. So I'm typically looking for what's typical for the area. And then I'm also really looking for like minimum of 1,000 square feet, typically 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bath being ideal. But obviously my favorite are the vinyl villages, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bath, attached 2-car garage. But I think it also really just comes down to what your portfolio needs at that time. Are you in the position where it makes sense for you to take on another project, or do you need to pull in some cash? And we've had, phases where we kept everything. And then we've had other phases where it's like, we need to sell some stuff, or, we need to turn the inventory we have coming in. So I think it's kind of just a running balance of what does vacancy look like? What do construction needs look like? and what do cash flow needs look like? Is kind of
what do log cabin
how we
needs
make our
look like?
decision.
We'll be having an episode on log cabins.
The answer is never. You're not Davy Crockett.
Andrew, I know you guys in Kansas City have bought kind of a continuum in terms of the lower end homes to middle homes. How do you decide that in terms of keeping in your rental portfolio there?
I mean, usually our goal is to keep everything we can buy as long as it's not too expensive to just simply cash flow. We generally avoid buying in really bad areas. We had a couple experiences with that, and it was not good. So we did liquidate a few of those things just because we didn't want to hold them. It wasn't a strategy per se. I think if you're buying in really bad areas, generally you need to be a specialist at it. It's not for the uninitiated.
Or a slumlord, either or.
Yeah, or slumlord. But we generally look at properties kind of ranging from the lower, like kind of working class-ish, which would probably be like what we call like a cash flow play, where it's high cash
like
flow.
Like a C minus?
C minus probably. To which we're not looking for large amounts of appreciation. It's a little harder to have built-in equity or not much of it, but it will cash flow better. Up to sort of middle class, which would be more of an equity. We're not going to get much cash flow, maybe a little bit above break even, but more equity and also more chance for appreciation, as those areas tend to appreciate more. And then in the middle, which is kind of lower middle class, probably our bread and butter, sort of C plus B minus, which kind of get a little bit of both. If you're getting into the more expensive properties, like houses that usually are owned, homeowners buy, those are hard to rent out and make work with any sort of debt on them. And so if we're getting into those, when we do, we usually flip them, like we're doing a flip right now on a house that's we're probably going to list for $290,000 or $300,000, and that probably rent for about $2,000. That's not going to cover the expenses, and so that doesn't make sense. We can make a decent profit on it, we'll flip it, but that's not generally been our strategy. We want to hold pretty much everything.
I think something I want to highlight there is you have a range. I think a lot of people, I'm going to buy in this one particular area because I like this particular asset class. And if you want to build a portfolio of size, you do have to have diversity. And I think that's actually one of the things that I would say we did a little wrong in my portfolio. And one of the things we're working on fixing moving forward is we really didn't do many of the working class type plays. A lot of our stuff is higher, Vinyl Village-y, built post 2000, and it rents really well. It doesn't cash flow very much. But like Bill mentioned on the appreciation swing, we just recomped our entire portfolio, and we had single assets that went up $20,000, $30,000 in the past year, 18 months. But at the same time, you got to pay staff. So that has to come from somewhere. So I think having a diverse, it's just like stocks, right? You wouldn't be just in tech or just in medical or just in US or just in overseas. If you're playing the stock game, chances are you have a diversified portfolio, which ideally should somewhat recession-proof your assets. This is kind of the same way. If you only have A-class assets that just pay for themselves and there's no cash flow, you could potentially be in some hot water if you have, large expenses come up. On the same end, you don't want to just own C-class properties that don't appreciate, because if the market appreciates, I have friends in Denver that particular assets went up 200-300% in the past couple of years. If all you owned were low-end properties, you missed out on that fun.
In upper end areas, and some of our listeners are likely living on the coast or in places that are really, really hard to make cash flow if you have any debt on them at all, particularly if you have 75% LTV on them, which is what we want to get, because we want to burr out of our properties and get our money back as much as we possibly can. But you have to really kind of be a niche player. You have to look for the opportunities. One of the properties we just bought in Portland and almost have completed rehabbing, we're going to rent as a group home. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit, Amanda, and give us some numbers on that.
Well, it's sort of a to be determined. So hopefully it's something we can report on. So if we were to rent it as a single family house in Portland, we would probably be looking about $2,250. It does have 5 bedrooms. It's on a large lot, but it's not a giant home, but it is all one level. And so it sort of lent itself to the opportunity to maybe bring in like a adult foster care. That it's a really strong business model, not that we're going to run, but that people that do run these, take care of seniors or maybe disabled adults in like a smaller home environment. And, so basically they're running a business out of it. We're trying to figure out with the bank if they would look at that as sort of a commercial use of our residential property and if that could affect the value. Since when we rehabbed it, we did extra things to attract a residential care facility to come in and, take over the lease on this. And, a house that would rent to a family for $2,250, we can rent out for probably $4,000. To a residential care facility. We have a couple of places like this in Eugene. It's worked out really great for us. It's just, we're trying to figure out if the bank can figure out with the appraisal and the appraiser a different sort of a value than just value as a residential home. Because at the end of the day, the resale value could go to an adult care facility or to an individual homeowner, and how would that affect the value moving forward? For us, $4,000 rent's going to go a lot further towards our cash flow than the $2,250, which would barely cover the PITI on it. So it's still a work in progress that we're kind of finding our way through.
I think a couple other options if you're in a higher priced area, ADUs, attached dwelling units, is something, I know people doing it in California. I know people doing it in Texas. In fact, one of Stewardship's partners is doing some stuff in Austin with those. Another option is Airbnb-ing out. If you have something like a duplex, from a cash flow perspective, you may be able to get a lot more money going short term. Now, one caution I would make with that, your business is dependent on somebody else's business. And I had a good friend of mine who owned about 9 properties in Hawaii. And when the regulation changed, he all of a sudden, the market was just flooded with Airbnb properties that don't cash flow unless it's a short-term rental. So all of a sudden, he had to liquidate 9 assets he bought because regulations changed. So be a little cautious of that. Not just adult care facilities. We've had pretty good luck with a couple state-run programs, some of them being like parole type stuff. We've had some pretty good luck with some of the kind of group homes. And then I'd say
another one is creating an apartment in a house. We bought a house for $325,000. And I don't know, Amanda, how much money we put into it. At least 25, I think. But what we were able to do, it was somewhat...
Double that.
Really? Is that much?
I said... Yeah.
Look it up while we're here on the line.
Oh, I sent it to you earlier today. It was, our budget was 25. It was 46 and counting.
Okay, 46 and counting. Darn.
Is that the one at your house, Amanda?
No.
So one thing I think that our listeners should know, because I think this is fascinating. Bill owns well over $100 million worth of real estate at this point. And house hacks. He has, is it 2 apartments that are basically in your attic?
One apartment with 2 bedrooms.
One.
Okay. 1 2-bedroom apartment. Amanda does something similar. This is not a bad strategy. I built
my home with an ADU in it. So I have an apartment on the other side of my garage.
It's the only property in that subdivision that has an ADU built into it, which is really cool.
It does. And it covers a third of my mortgage. So it's pretty amazing.
I would also say with these, I was having this conversation with my wife and she was like, you're out of your mind if you think I'm going to have somebody on the other side of my wall again. Like we've been in houses for so long. I've stayed at Bill's house. I spent time at Amanda's house. You cannot tell. Like if this is done right, this isn't like, you're at a college dorm and you can hear people on the other side of the wall, or even like a condo where like, oh, they fell down the stairs. If this is done right, it's virtually undetectable to anyone that, like with Bill's house, I wouldn't even have known there was apartments if he told me I couldn't park in a particular spot. So that's another on the getting started in buy and hold real estate investing is potentially a good option. So
anything you could do to
there.
build your cash flow up, because that's really what it's all about. And to finish this story about the house that I thought was going to cost us $25,000, that cost us $46,000 to rehab.
It's just so far.
It's finished, Amanda.
It's going to go
I led
over
the
50.
appraiser through the house on Monday. All right. They were real impressed. Anyway,
they better be for going double over the budget.
Yeah. The extra apartment, I mean, we even put a washer dryer in the space in the basement that was somewhat set up for this, but we completed it, putting walls in, putting a washer dryer in, just making the separation total. And yet there's a door that allows you to go through that we would lock on both sides if in fact, and also separate entrance into this apartment that really makes it pretty nifty. But it could be rented as 2 living units, but there is a niche market out there of folks who would love to have an independent apartment in their house, with their house, next to their house, that they could rent to their grandmother or their mother-in-law,
or house their 20-year-old son that they
my
don't
mother-in-law is
want
in
to
there.
keep
I
track
keep
of.
that door locked. Now you ain't coming upstairs.
So whatever it takes, but instead of renting it for probably about maybe $2,300, we're looking at $3,000 if we rent it with that niche apartment that can be re-rented out by the person there. If we have to, now this is a little touchy. We would rent them separately, and we'd probably even get more rent out of them. In that case, because the utilities are combined, we'd have to pay the utilities and bill it back. That's not our preference. We could maybe get a few $100s more per month on that, but our preference is just to have one person oversee the whole thing. They pay all the utilities, and they rent out that extra space in any way they want to.
I would say I think the point here, if you're in a more expensive area, is don't just like throw your hands up and give up. And this doesn't work for me because I'm not in the Midwest. There are people in your market that have figured out how to make this work. I was looking at just San Diego, which is where I live right now. And there's a single family that owns something like 3,500 single family houses. Now, I can tell you there's no way they have a negative cash flow on 3,500 assets. Their burn rate would be insane. Now, that doesn't mean there's maybe some that they don't bleed a little, and others that they make it up on. And obviously this was acquired over probably decades, but there are people in your market that have figured this out. It may not be conventional. One of the other things Bill does is student housing. It's rented out by the bedroom. And some of these are houses, right? So there is a way to make this work in just about every market. It's just a matter of, are you willing to figure it out or not?
And think outside the box. And are you committed to this buy and hold real estate model? I mean, it's not for everyone. We clearly are committed about it. We devoted a whole podcast to talking about how much we love buy and hold real estate. But, it's just because we believe in it. It's what we do. And, Bill's initial point, it's really just a way for the layman to build long-term wealth. And that is, again, getting rich over a long period of time. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not a get rich quick. And it does require a lot of work. So
we need to do some slogan t-shirts.
Let me point you to our ebook. If you haven't gotten that ebook, you need to get it. Chapter 1 will settle the issue for you as to whether buy and hold is really worth pursuing. In chapter 1, it goes through the fact that buy and hold is the ideal real estate investment strategy. Well, let's go through this acronym a little bit. I is for income. D is for depreciation. That is, you have tax advantages. E is for equity buildup. A is for appreciation. L is for leverage. And then there's one more I that I want to put in there, and that's the fact you're dealing with an inefficient market. But let's maybe start with leverage, because this is the power of buy and hold real estate. We'll start it kind of at the end there. Leverage means that I can control with $1, with $5, with $10, I can control $100. It's like a teeter-totter. You're on the very end of the teeter-totter. The other person is on the very front of the teeter-totter, and you have all the control. Even if that person is heavier than you can lift them up because of leverage. Leverage in our business culture is in precious few places. It's very hard to leverage your money. They let you leverage, I think, your stock portfolio by 50%. That's as far as you can do it, because there was a time when you could leverage 90%, and a lot of people, as the market turned down, lost their shirt and drug a lot of lending institutions down with them. So where in the world can you leverage your money, use other people's money to enhance the control that you have? Well, real estate investment is one of them, because again, you're unless you're a trust fund baby, you don't have unlimited funds. So you're putting in a few of your dollars and you're borrowing the rest of those dollars, either from a private lender, seller financed, conventional bank loan. And with that, you're able to exponentially control assets that have the potential to give these benefits of IDEAL.
I think one of the other points to make here is, with leverage, this does not make sense if you do not have cash flow. So you have to analyze the deal from the standpoint of, if I'm doing a cash out refinance, or if I'm into this thing for 75% of what it's worth on a mortgage, does it still cash flow? And I think not only looking at that initially, but also reviewing that on an annual basis makes a lot of sense. I had a property that it's an A-class house. I love it. The guy who's in there pays like clockwork every single time, actually pays early normally. And I was like, this has been a really good investment. I wonder how well it's done. And, I have Amanda send me over the spreadsheet. And I think on this particular property in 18 months, we'd cash flowed $400. Well, that's not, I'm not retiring anytime soon on the $25 a month I'm getting there. Now the property's paying for itself. That includes all maintenance and everything, but that's something you want to be pretty cautious of, is this actually going to, Bill has the expression of, if it can pay for itself and then $1, he'll do the deal. I think I
would go a little bit more than that personally.
Well, my conservative
Bill's
son,
a little bit more of a leveraged man than maybe our average listener. But I think the point there is, you've got to make sure it is actually paying for itself. Getting a $20,000 cash out profit is great, but if you now bleed $200 a month,
well, and there is a point really in buy and hold real estate, and this is why I call it survive till you thrive, because if you're going to scale, you can do property management yourself up to maybe 20 units, 25, 30 units. I don't know. So you're kind of running around doing everything, which I did, and most of us did when we started. That's just the way you've got to start. But at some point you start hiring this out. And that's when your cash flow doesn't usually meet the demands of having a payroll also, that you have property management. Either you're outsourcing it or you're doing it yourself. And so that's where the real crux of the difficulty comes. And you need to be prepared to make that jump. If you want to scale, you've gotta figure out how to keep your cash flow high enough, and yet keep building your portfolio at the same time.
Yeah, I think that, the way I've looked at it, and I think I'm actually good with this analogy, I view my buy and hold portfolio like a really, really cool 401k. This is something I'm not expecting a dividend this month, right? I'm not expecting a dividend next month. This is something that my retirement is taking care of at 26. And that's pretty dang cool. And will continue to go up even from there. But I look at the transactional piece, the wholesaling and flipping and wholetailing, that is kind of the now money, right? So, I know a lot of people that, I want to get to 10 units so I can retire, and, cool, I'm getting $2,000 a month. Well, first off, that doesn't do much for me in San Diego, but it's, really like, what if instead you took that $2,000 a month that you're hoping to cash flow, put that back into marketing, and then use that to find other deals or find properties to flip. In Indianapolis, our average profit on an asset we choose not to keep is right around $17,000, right? So it's not very hard to make a very livable income while building long-term wealth. A friend of mine wanted to become a full-time missionary and was like, I'm trying to just add up how many rental properties I need in order to make this work. And I was like, first off, what's property management going to look like with you in Africa? Like who's doing that piece? You look at from a cash flow perspective, his goal was to pull in something like $3,000 a month. It's like, you only have to do a couple deals a year to have that sort of income. So, I would say maybe that's a little bit of a paradigm shift, but I know even just from what I've seen being around a lot of buy and hold investors, really where you make your good large chunks of money is in the appreciation, in the debt pay down, in the depreciation, the tax benefits, and then occasionally you get a really nice cash out refi check. But I wouldn't expect it to be this like fairy tale. This is going to be passive. I'm going to retire with 20 units.
Collect my mailbox money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would look at it a lot more of you're building long-term wealth, like 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and then use the skills you've developed there to generate kind of your now income if you don't like your W-2 job.
Andrew, I wonder if you might share just a little bit about 9 years being in Kansas City. You guys finally had a refinance that gave you quite a bit of breathing room here recently, which is pretty cool, but it was been tight up till now.
Well, I mean, yeah, real estate's always generally tight when you're using the BRRRR strategy or when you're trying to cash flow. I think people expect lots and just tons and tons of cash flow when you're having, when you have debt on the property, especially early on, are just kidding themselves. But we finally started to tap into some of the equity we'd built up over the course of time. Some of our first refinances that went through in 2012, 2013, we decided, there's been a lot of appreciation in the market. There's been quite a bit of principal pay down, and their interest rates were higher. And even though so it makes sense to refinance those, and we finally pulled out a good chunk of change. Now we could have refinanced them earlier if we really wanted to, if we really needed to. One thing we had more properties to finance, newer properties, and so limited number of banks willing to give us a limited number of loans. We wanted to prioritize those. We've kind of gotten to the point where we don't have as many properties to finance in the front end, and so we can use some of that potential, those banks, to refinance older properties and finally pull out some money and get some breathing room. It's a very nice feeling to pull out a substantial chunk of change from properties that you've owned for a good amount of time, but it takes a while to get there. It is really a slow process. I wouldn't say an arduous process, but a slow process, and it's something that you need patience. It is a get rich slow scheme. It is the from the old Stanford marshmallow experiment, the second marshmallow, the thing that you.
It's like the fourth marshmallow.
Yeah, delayed gratification.
Delayed gratification, and that is really the name of the game, and why real estate works so well.
I would say if you're the kid in that Stanford marshmallow experiment, the 5-year-old sitting in front of the marshmallow who said, if you just wait 15 minutes, we're going to give you a second marshmallow, or you can eat it now if you want to. If you're the kid that's going to eat it now and can't wait, probably buy and hold real estate investment's not for you. But if you're the kid who can say, I can hang out here and, fidget around and look at that with, longing eyes. If I can get another one in 15 minutes, that'll be 2. If you're that kind of kid, buy and hold real estate investment is probably in your future or could be in your future. And I would significantly encourage you.
Real quick before we close, just because I want to highlight something here. Andrew's Kansas City portfolio alone is an Inc. 5000 company. That is a huge accomplishment. But I think the thing to take away from that is that doesn't mean they're drowning in cash flow, right? When you're doing long-term buy and hold, this is a long-term strategy. And I think a lot of people kind of have the misconception there.
Inc. 5000 is based on revenue, so you can be bleeding. That you could just be hemorrhaging cash.
Thankfully, you are not.
List.
But
we are not hemorrhaging, no. But you could be. And
here's the other.
We basically just told some people Santa's not real.
Yeah, sorry.
But here's the other advantage: if you can survive to thrive, here's what thriving looks like. You get to the point where you can refinance properties that have built up equity now, have appreciated some. You've rehabbed them and added value, so they're worth more now. And all of a sudden, you get tax-free money. Now you are incurring a debt, or you're increasing your debt that you have to now pay more for per month, likely. But all that money that comes in is not taxable because it's a loan. And so it's just another huge advantage to buy and hold.
Dave Ramsey would not approve, but
we're fans of Dave Ramsey, except when it comes to real estate debt. And with that, maybe Dave, if you ever want to come on our podcast, we're open to have you on. So if anybody knows Dave, please let him. Hey, join the Good Stewards one of these times, Dave. We'd love to have you. Or maybe send in a question or comment that you would have. And for the rest of you as well, we'd really appreciate those comments. If you have a topic you'd like us to talk about in the future, please send that in as well. And check out thegoodstewards.com. We'd love to have you join our community. Thanks.